He waited until we were completely alone. What he did next? It's something I never thought my own twin could do. I'm still shaken, but you need to hear this. Growing up with a twin is unique. You share everything, birthdays, secrets, even your own face. But what happens when the person you're closest to crosses a line that changes everything? Let me take you back to one night that still haunts me. It started like any other evening. We were home alone. Our parents had gone out for the night, leaving us with the usual, a movie, snacks, and an empty house. Typical sibling stuff, right? But then he turned to me with this look, a look that I'd seen before, but never quite like this. "Let's play a game," he said. I'm not really a fan of his games. They always end with me being the butt of the joke. But this time he was insistent. He locked the door and pocketed the key, grinning like he knew something I didn't. At first I thought it was just a prank. We'd always been the kind of brothers who loved messing with each other. But this time, it felt different. He said, "This game has only one rule. You can't leave." No matter what happens, I laughed it off. But when he locked the door and pocketed the key, my heart sank. My first instinct was to laugh, but there was something about the way he was acting. It wasn't just playful, it was calculated. I remember sitting there, feeling the weight of the room shift. He held something in his hands. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it seemed important. His hands were shaking slightly, which only made the tension worse. "What's that?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed the object on the table between us and sat down. It was an old, battered journal. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. The way he looked at me sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the look of someone playing a joke. It was serious, almost too serious. Then he began asking questions. They started simple. "What's your favourite memory?" "What's the worst thing you've ever done?" But as they went on, they became darker, more personal. "Have you ever lied to me? Would you betray me if you had to?" I tried to laugh it off, but he wouldn't let me. "Answer the question," he said, his voice firm. I gave vague answers, hoping he'd get bored, but he just kept going. "Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you were the only one left? If it was just you?" That question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. His response was chilling. "Sometimes I think about it, what it would be like if it was just me, no one else." I stared at him, unsure if he was serious or trying to scare me. "That's messed up," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "It's not messed up. It's real. Sometimes I wonder what it would take for you to understand me, to see what I see." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. My chest tightened as I tried to think of what to say. "You're scaring me," I admitted. For a moment he looked like he regretted what he said, but then he shook his head. "You should be scared," he said. "Maybe then you'd finally get it." The power flickered, and for a brief second the room was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, he was holding the journal again. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said. "But you won't understand it, not yet." I kept telling myself it was just a game, but the way he looked at me, the way his voice sounded, it was like he was someone else entirely. And then the power went out. That's when things got terrifying. I tried to act brave, but every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there. I could hear him moving around, but I couldn't see him. That's when I realized he was behind me. He whispered, "Do you trust me?" And before I could answer, I won't spoil everything, but let me just say this. When I finally figured out what he was doing, why he was doing it, it wasn't a prank. It wasn't even anger. It was something much deeper and much scarier. Let's just say it wasn't about me. It was about him and something he'd been hiding for years. I wish I could say we talked it out and everything went back to normal. But that night left a scar, one I'm not sure will ever fully heal. Part 4. That night I learned 2 things. 1, even the people closest to you can surprise you in ways you'd never expect. And 2, sometimes the scariest secrets are the ones we keep from ourselves. For weeks after that night, I replayed everything that happened. The words he said, the looks he gave, even the silence between us. It was heavy, like an unanswered question that kept pulling me down. I wondered if I'd missed signs earlier in our lives. Were there moments when he needed me and I just wasn't paying attention? Or was this something he'd always carried, silently growing until it became impossible to contain? One memory that kept coming back was a summer afternoon when we were kids. We'd been playing in the backyard, building forts out of old sheets and boxes. At one point he sat down and said, "Do you ever feel like you don't belong?" I laughed it off, saying something about how he was my twin and, of course, he belonged. But now, looking back, I wonder if that was the first crack. The first time he tried to tell me something was wrong. I started going through old photos and letters, searching for clues about who he really was. In one of the photos, he wasn't smiling. It was subtle, but it stood out in a sea of happy moments. There were other things too. Little notes he'd written that seemed innocent at the time, but now felt loaded with meaning. I decided to open the journal he'd shown me that night. It was filled with entries going back years. Most of them were normal, the kind of stuff anyone might write. Complaints about school, funny things our friends did, dreams about the future. But then there were pages that stood out, darker pages. "Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life instead of living it," one entry read. "Like I'm just a passenger and someone else is driving." Reading those words felt like being punched in the gut. How had I not known he was feeling this way? How had I missed it? But then I realized he hadn't wanted me to know. He'd kept it hidden, even from me. One night, a few weeks after the incident, I found him sitting in the same spot where everything had unfolded. The journal was in his hands and he looked lost. I sat down next to him, not saying anything at first. Finally I asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" He didn't answer right away. But then he said something that stayed with me ever since. "I just wanted you to see me," he said. "Not as your twin, just me." Those words broke me. I realized that in all the years we'd spent together, I'd never really seen him as his own person. He was my brother, my twin, my other half. But he wasn't just that. He was someone with his own thoughts, fears and struggles. Someone I'd overlooked in ways I hadn't even realized. That night we talked for hours. It wasn't easy. There were a lot of tears, a lot of things left unsaid for too long. But it was a start to understanding each other in a way we never had before. If you've ever felt like someone you love is struggling, don't wait for it to escalate. Talk to them. Reach out. Sometimes just knowing someone cares can make all the difference. This isn't just my story, it's a reminder that relationships, even the closest ones, require effort and understanding. If this resonated with you, share it with someone you trust. Let them know you're there for them. And if you're carrying something heavy, don't carry it alone. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe,